The Sudan as it is today and South Sudan as we know it today have been one and the same. This has been the largest country in Africa before July 9th, 2011. So what led to the separation of the Sudan? What ensured that today we see that we have two different Sudans? The Southern Sudan then, today South Sudan, and the Sudan that retained the name, which is what used to be called by the Southerners the North Sudan. Ladies and gentlemen, the Sudan gained its independence in 1956, 1st of January. But before that time, a lot of things have been happening within the land. The Southerners were majorly left minus institutions such as schools and other amenities. For many years, they will toil. And this necessitated the so-called, this sort of marginalization led to the uprising and people wanting to have either a reformed Sudan where everybody should be respected and human rights adhered to, or some of the liberators of Southerners say that they needed South Sudan as a country. One such man who's still alive today is Dr. Riek Machar, who in 1997 signed an agreement with the North saying we need Junuba Sudan or South Sudan to be independent. Of course, this has been claimed before, even in 1947 by Sabo's Dio, who preferred a Junuba Sudan that is independent. Well, we know through the longest war in Africa, civil war in Africa, which happened since 1982, or if you may say 1983, to 2005 when the Comprehensive Peace Agreement was signed, came to pass. We know that the two Sudan were separated. But then, when we look back, a lot of questions have been asked of whether the Sudan was better as one, or now that there is separation, that each of the countries is doing better than it was before. I will leave you to answer that question. But something that is becoming clear is, since then, there has been major conflict within these nations. Between them, there was some bit of war at the border, the so-called Age League War, just before the independence, or just around the independence of South Sudan, which was sorted. But in the recent weeks, we have seen something of a sort that is cropping up. We know in the Sudan there is the rebel group, the RSF, who have been fighting Mohammed Hamdan, or the Supreme Council of the leader of the Supreme Council of Sudan since 2023 April. In South Sudan, we know there has been a war that has been continuing since 2013, a conflict, internal conflict, which has necessitated an unnecessary displacement of so many South Sudanese to different countries, including, ironically, to the Sudan. And if you look at also the Sudan, when this fighting, the current conflict that we see started, the Sudanese, ironically, also ran to South Sudan as refugees. So we see two sisterly countries whose culture is somewhat intertwined. And that when the other cry, the other go to the other for help. In fact, we can even say that the lifeline of these two countries, since the 1970s when it was discovered, in the areas around Bentiu, the oil continue to be a connective factor between these countries, besides the culture, or besides all the other social amenities that continue to operate, like businesses and everything else that continue. So oil to this day still connects both Sudan and South Sudan, because the oil in South Sudan is exported through Port Sudan. So a war in Sudan to the interests of South Sudanese is not good. Similarly, a war in South Sudan or in South Sudan is not good to the Northerners. So these countries today find themselves in a dilemma where they are both having internal wars. South Sudan is trying to find her feet, trying to put her acts together. Although we must say that other pieces of what that are going on now, if they do not work, may lead to even a bigger dilemma. So, but why I'm doing this video today is to bring to our attention some diplomatic questioning, something that is cropping up that needs to be seen from an extra eye, so that people do not say later that we did not see and we did not know it. Ladies and gentlemen, the last few weeks, South Sudanese were ambushed, if that is the right word to use, or found themselves within the city of Wad Madani in Sudan, where they are taking shelter, because now since the Sudan war erupted, many people during the national South Sudanese who could not even come to South Sudan because of the conflict, they left actually South Sudan because of the conflict in the first place, could not return back to South Sudan because they are refugees in the north, find themselves in a city where fighting is taking place. And they were killed, with the horrific videos being shown on social media, very unfortunately. The hunger unleashed on them is seen by the Sudanese forces, as if the South Sudanese are on the side of the rebels, and that they are assisting the rebels to fight them. But a question that then beats that is, there were also children being shown, and women. Were they also part of this? Because these claims cannot be said to be true. So this raised a big concern within the South Sudan community, and including South Sudan, and that even the president of South Sudan went live and condemned such killings, and many other leaders in South Sudan, especially the citizens, were not amazed by this. On the other hand, we saw in the South Sudan, because of the hunger, and there are so many South Sudanese businessmen and leaders and people who have ran out also from the war, who are taking shelter in Juba, another part of South Sudan, had to be protected, because we saw the hunger from those whose families were killed in cold blood in Sudan was coming up within these cities, and people wanted to take arms, wanted to harm these innocent also Sudanese. Luckily, South Sudanese across the states realized that this was not going to have any gain. Especially in Juba, the government of South Sudan tried its best to preserve its diplomatic relationship with the sisterly nation of Sudan. And by as much as possible, try to calm down the situation. Although shops had to be closed in the process, but at least as of now, we know that South Sudanese are going back to their shops. So the Sudanese, are going back to their shops to operate as usual. This one, I think, is a good gesture that was shown by South Sudan, because to our interest, having the Sudan and South Sudan being tranquil and calm within that Nile Valley is very important. We also see a video or a statement by the supreme leader of Sudan stating clearly that this is nothing that should happen, and that he will form a committee that will investigate these barbaric killings. Now, what is I want to bring us to our attention in this video is, do we see a potential that as much and as far as these wars continue, these internal conflicts continue, as they continue to boil up, if they are not addressed by these leaders, if these leaders do not give in to the demands of their citizens, or try to ensure that there is a civilian leadership, for example, in Sudan, and that there can be a change of governance even in South Sudan, or better leadership that ensure that everybody feels represented, everybody feel that they are part of the cake, part of the national cake, that we could see some boiling points in the future. And as these internal wars continue, what does that do to the social infrastructure in these nations? As the Sudanese continue to flock to South Sudan and the South Sudanese flock to Sudan, what does this even mean to the separation in the first place of these two countries? Are we going to see a boil down of diplomatic relations between Sudan and South Sudan? Because if these aggressions continue, there is some sort of reminder of the so many wars that are fought in the past, that are still in the minds of both the Sudanese and South Sudanese, especially who are still alive, those who fought in the liberation struggles, who really remember this. Ladies and gentlemen, are we seeing a likelihood of deterioration of relationship between the Sudan and South Sudan? Can this be abated? I think yes. The action shown so far by both leadership has given direction that everything can be solved and that things can get better if they are handled politically, and also justice is served to the victims. If this is not done, ladies and gentlemen, in years to come, we might see something that we are not proud of along the Nile Valley, and that is between the Sudan and South Sudan. I really hope not. I really hope that this would not happen, and that the leaders of these countries would come together and ensure they cement a better relationship that will ensure that the citizens are satisfied and that there is peace and harmony going forward. We cannot afford another war, because we know that with war, destruction is the next thing. Even with the natural disasters destroying both countries right now, in terms of floods, another war by the bullet would just make things worse. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is what we came to analyze today. I do not know what you think, but will a South Sudan and a Sudan a challenge of diplomatic relations be something that we will look forward to, or should we not be worried? In my view, we should be worried and ensure that we put strategic measures that will ensure these challenges are calmed down. Thank you very much for watching the video. Until next time.